चलिए बच्चों, आज हम पढ़ेंगे चैप्टर 1 सप्लाई सीए फाइनल जीएसटी। What is a supply? Supply is anything for what we get a consideration in return. It could be anything whichever involves a financial transaction which is done where a supplier supplies any product or service to a recipient. It involves three components: supplier, it involves recipient, it involves consideration. This is a supply, but a supply on itself does not mean anything. A person selling goods to B would be a supply if it is for the course and furtherance of business. So these are the must things that any supply must have. Let's go. First of all, a typical supply might involve a consideration, or it does not have no consideration. A supply with consideration is very easy to find, where you have to only see a supplier and a recipient and a furtherance of business. But whereas in there is no consideration, how we can constitute a supply? Basically, the most important transaction that enters into no consideration supply is it must be from a relative, plus it should be course of furtherance of business, plus already no consideration must be there, should be there. Who is a relative? Relative is family, mother, father, sister, brother. These must be dependent. Whereas spouse, son, daughter, ये डिपेंडेंट इंडिपेंडेंट ना भी हो चलेगा. चलिए, first of all, a supply with consideration. We will be talking about with consideration part today, and also not consideration. चलिए, the basic example of a supply is A supplying goods to B supplier and R is a recipient, and in return recipient pays him the consideration that might be in rupees 1 lakh. This is what we know from the inter. He provided him 100 kgs of uh, steel. This is a basic example. Now, what happens if someone who had a car that he had, and he sold him to another dealer? So basically, this dealer is going to pay him consideration, but there is certain exemption that in this chapter is given, that wherever a person who has not taken any ITC on such car will not, this transaction where the seller or the supplier would say has not taken any ITC on the product, this car, that means slash this person was a personal purpose car, and if it is sold, no GST is applicable. Now, चले. Similarly, where any person has given the prasadam sold by the temple, it is also an exempt supply. Church, temple, these are, you have to remember. The first one was if any personal car was sold and no ITC was taken on it, and if I sold it a personal car, then the someone who's buying from the unregistered person, this transaction is not taxable. Second is the temple giving prasadam to the pilgrims, that is also not taxable. The third thing is if someone sold his jewelry, that is also not a taxable supply, not a taxable supply, right? चलिए. अब now we can come to non-consideration. With consideration, but import of service. Let's ignore the fact import of service. If we any import any service, it is a supply. Import the import, it is an import, right? And it is taxable in India. But there are few exemptions, exceptions. Uh, if we have consideration, it must be for furtherance of the business. That means without consideration plus business purpose, but he's not a relative, not a relative, then this is not a supply. You have to learn this part. This is a very important part. If we import from any person, but it is for a business purpose, but he's not a relative, then it is not a supply. Without consideration, because like how can the government prescribe GST on it where no consideration is charged? Now comes the very important part. Schedule 1 supplies. Number one Schedule 1 supply is permanent transfer of business asset, transfer of asset, where ITC has been taken. ITC has to be taken. If no ITC is taken, not a supply. Second, transfer of goods to relative. Para 3 agent. Buying agent or selling agent. Both cover here. Who issue invoice? Right? These are supplier. These are supplies, even though no consideration is involved. So example is a supplier sell to any other person, recipient. But there is an agent in between. The supplier sells him, then he sells another. Then the transaction which I supply goods to this person, even if this is without consideration, this is also supply. This even then this is a supply. But if this person is like a intermediary, if this person, think about it at the same case, if in the same case this agent is just an intermediary who meets these people, let the company to meet them. The the invoice is issued by the supplier to the recipient, and the goods are sold by the supplier to the recipient directly. The agent is just for the commission purpose, and he's there only for commission. He doesn't have any involvement. Then, in such a case, this is not a para 3, not a para 3 schedule 1 sub agent, thus no supply. Let's go. This is a very important assumption because ISA tests this question very much. Now, the last point that we have discussed, if if we supply to a relative without consideration plus business purpose, then this is a supply. Note, it must be our business. So the question may be asking like A supplying event management services to B his brother's son wedding. So in this case, some might be thinking that this is a professional service. Some might even think that since he's supplying his brother's son wedding, it might be a personal case. If this confuses you, then you are right. This you have to assume this is a professional supply for A. If nothing is written, if there is written somewhere in the answer that there is a hint that this supply made by the A was not in business purpose, then this is not a supply. Second indication how it will give you that this is not a supply, that he will say his brother has a big business in big business or a reputed job. In that case also it is not a supply because his brother is not dependent. We have earlier read that his brother should be dependent on him. Let's go. Now, import of services done. Now there comes schedule 3 supplies. These are all the supplies that